just after 5 in the morning, and the train underneath him just tears itself apart. The man inside was the most powerful warlord in all of China, and within hours he was gone. But his own government refused to say so. This is Zhang Zuolin, the warlord China faked alive for over 2 weeks. For over 2 weeks, an entire province ran on the signature of a dead man. He'd clawed his way up from horseback bandit to generalissimo of an entire nation. Now Japan wanted him gone, and somebody made absolutely sure of it. So who blew up that train, and why would his own side lie about his death? It's June of 1928, and Zhang has just lost a war he shouldn't have started. He's pulling back from Beijing, running for home turf, Manchuria. For years, the Japanese army had propped him up, a useful puppet with an army of his own. But lately, the puppet had started cutting his own strings. He wouldn't hand over the railways or the mines Japan had been counting on. Overnight, he'd gone from asset to liability. So one young colonel started sketching something far more drastic than a demotion. His name was Kawamoto Daisaku, and he already had a bridge picked out. The Huanggutun Bridge, a quiet stretch of track just outside Mukden. Explosives went in under the stonework, wired tight and left waiting. All that was left to do was wait for Zhang's train to roll across it. At 5:23 in the morning, right on schedule, it did. The blast ripped the bridge apart directly under his private car. Soldiers dragged Zhang from the wreckage, barely breathing, badly burned. Hours later, back in Mukden, he was dead. And that's the moment his own government made a genuinely strange decision. They told absolutely no one. Not the public, not even most of his staff. For 17 days, an entire province was run by a dead man. Officials kept churning out orders signed with his name. Foreign visitors were politely turned away. The generalissimo, they were told, was resting. Even his own son wasn't told the full truth right away. Why bury a death this enormous? And exactly who were they hiding it from? Here's the twist nobody expects. The lie wasn't just about keeping Japan in the dark. It was buying time, mainly for one nervous young man to lock down his father's throne. And as long as Japan believed the old warlord still lived, they'd hesitate to move in too. So clerks kept forging his signature onto document after document. They even propped a decoy near his old windows, just a shape for the guards to see. Meanwhile, the real body had already gone into the ground, quietly and fast. No public funeral, no grave marker anyone could ever go find. And here's how far they were willing to take the lie. Doctors who treated him were sworn to silence. Household staff were quietly reassigned. Anyone who might let something slip simply stopped being anyone he'd ever see again. It wasn't one lie, it was dozens of smaller ones, all pointed the same direction. While his government kept insisting, quite calmly, that he'd simply gone quiet for a while. Incredibly, for over 2 weeks, the whole ruse actually held. Japan's army stayed put at the border, not entirely sure what they'd just pulled off. Because the truth was, even Tokyo hadn't signed off on this bombing. Colonel Kawamoto had gone ahead almost entirely on his own initiative. His planning, to put it kindly, outran his authority. A rogue colonel's private plot had nearly dragged 2 nations into open war. Back in Mukden, one anxious young man was watching the whole thing threaten to unravel. Zhang's son, Zhang Xueliang, was about to inherit all of it, ready or not. The empire, the enemies circling it, and now the secret of where the body actually lay. He had to slip back into Mukden without a single soul noticing him arrive. Disguised, silent, and quietly terrified, the Japanese would catch on before he even got home. Because if they realized the old warlord was really gone, they'd strike within hours. So the fiction had to hold, just a little longer, one more sleepless night at a time. 17 days after the blast, the truth finally broke. Zhang Zuolin was announced dead to a nation that had no idea it had been governed by a ghost. But by then, his son already had both hands firmly on the reins of power. The stall tactic, against all odds, had worked exactly as intended. Japan hadn't invaded, not yet anyway, and that yet would matter later. 17 days of lying had worked. The question now was how and when to stop. So who finally gave the order to tell the truth? It wasn't grief that ended the cover-up, it was arithmetic. His father's old officers were getting nervous, and nervous men talk. One more week of silence, and the whole province might have splintered on its own. So Zhang Xueliang made a calculation his father never got to make. Announced the death himself, on his own terms, before Japan could exploit the chaos. It was a gamble. Grief is loud, and loud things get noticed. But by then, he'd already secured the loyalty of the army his father built. The ghost government could finally rest, because the son was very much alive. And that's when the real question started spreading through Mukden's back rooms. Where exactly had they buried him during those 17 days? Some servants swore it was a family plot outside the city. Others swore the coffin never left the compound grounds at all. A formal reburial did happen, years later, with monks and incense and ceremony. But war came to Manchuria not long after, and records simply stopped surviving. Japan invaded properly 3 years later and kept every document it could seize. It's the kind of chaos that makes tidy history impossible to write afterward. And yet, years after all of it, he was given the formal burial the chaos first denied him. A real tomb, a real ceremony. Everything the first, hurried burial never got to be. It still stands today, in Liaoning, for anyone who wants to go see it. Which meant the real mystery was never really about where he ended up. It was about how long an entire nation could be talked into looking the other way. And the son who covered for him? He went on to change Chinese history himself. Years later, he'd kidnap his own commander-in-chief to force a war footing against Japan. The 17 days of pretending his father was alive turned out to be practice. Practice for holding a nation's nerve while telling it exactly what it needed to hear. And Colonel Kawamoto, the man who planted the bomb in the first place, Japan's own army quietly disciplined him and quietly buried the scandal too. No public trial, no real punishment. Just a transfer and a very short memo. So both sides, in their own way, buried the same man twice. But here's what almost nobody remembers about that morning on the bridge. Zhang Zuolin wasn't even supposed to be on that particular train car. He'd swapped carriages at the last minute, for reasons nobody fully explained. Some say a warning reached him. Some say it was simple bad luck. Either way, the swap put him directly over Kawamoto's charges instead of past them. A decision made in seconds decided how China's next 20 years would unfold. And that's the part historians still can't quite let go of. One warlord, one wrong carriage, and 17 days of a country talking to a ghost. The body that started it all did eventually get the send-off history owed it, just years later than it should have, and only after an entire nation had been fooled first. If you want the next chapter of this story, it's already loading in another warlord's life. Because 3 years after this bridge, Japan came back, and this time, they didn't leave. Zhang Xueliang would spend the rest of his life explaining what happened next. House arrest, decades of it. For a decision that saved his father's empire for exactly 3 years. His father, at least, finally got to rest in the open under his own name. If this channel does one thing well, it's finding the moments history tried to erase. So if you want a new one of these every single week, you know what to do. Subscribe, a new animated history documentary drops every Saturday. Because this wasn't even the strangest part of that decade for cover-ups. Governments have hidden deaths before. Rarely this well, and rarely this fast. 17 days doesn't sound like much, until you try to fake a living government for that long. Every clerk, every guard, every servant had to believe the lie hard enough to sell it. One nervous face, one slipped word, and the whole thing could have collapsed in a day. It never did. And that, more than the bomb itself, is the part worth remembering. Because the bridge only killed one man, the lie moved an entire country. And it worked, for exactly as long as it needed to, and not one day longer. Next week, we follow the warlord whose empire outlived him by exactly one lie. And the general who decided the truth could wait just a little longer. Because sometimes power isn't about who's really alive. It's about who says so. And in Liaoning, under a name and a headstone at last, Zhang Zuolin can finally stop being a secret.